We had almost finished talking about these years that I worked as an examiner, and I think it was ended up to be about 7 years. But we had among our other clients was the three major banks here in Decatur, and I had spoken about the culture that existed in the various shops and how you couldn't help but rate those in your own mind and as they applied to yourself. And the one downtown that I always felt like kind of fit what I was doing was the Citizens National. And I got to know a lot of people down there, and again, with the growth that was going on in the banking environment, the banks were running short of trained people. And not only that, but most of the people they had were not uneducated people. I shouldn't don't get me wrong on this, but they were people who had been formerly educated and so forth. And not that there was anything wrong with them, because there wasn't, but they needed some more people to kind of give them a head start on some things.
They're lacking experience. They had the formal education, but not the experience
Yeah.
part. Right.
Yeah. So one of the guys down there who was their chief lending officer just asked me one day, and this is almost a verbatim quote. He said, "When are you going to come to work for us?" And I said, "Well, we haven't even talked about it." So he said, "Well, how would you like to start on Monday?" And that was about the extent of my interview process with the bank. So I had to formalize that I was leaving my current employer, and I handled that according to the books. And I think a couple of weeks later, then I walked into my new job at the Citizens National Bank.
And what was that job? Your first?
I started off as a junior loan officer, and I really had, I had been on the other side of the examination process, but I never sat across the desk from a customer and had to deal with the direct customer relationships. And I always wondered if I could really do it. And always in the back of my mind was I wasn't sure I could, but I knew someday I had to try it. So
Approximately what year is that? Do you recall?
67, yeah. And I think in the fall of 67, and kind of the same thing existed in the banking environment. It was just rife with opportunity, and a lot of the guys had. There was a big age gap. I was really a youngster I was 27 when I went in there, but a lot of the guys were in their late 50s and 60s who were in leadership positions, and there was a big gap, and it wasn't populated very well. So it created a lot of great opportunity, and I got thrown into the customer part of it pretty rapidly, and it was mostly on the job training. I knew the nuts and bolts, but the customer thing, you can have knowledge of all the nuts and bolts in the world, but you still got to be able to relate to the customer. And if you can't, you better remain as an examiner or do something else. But I found that part of it to be the most interesting. And of course, there's always personalities working within the banking environment too that are interesting to work around. And I had a couple of bosses, and the guy was the dominant ownership family, and this bank was a very unusual individual. He put it mildly, but he was, and it was. He was very willing to take me along to a lot of different spots.
Do you call him your mentor then?
To a certain extent, although I had a lot of mentors that I worked with. Some of them were more direct mentors as far as the nuts and bolts part of banking. This guy was more a mentor in terms of, I'd say, more social parts of it.
Can you tell me his name?
And the relationship parts of it at a high level.
His name?
Was more into that.
Can you say his name?
Bill Barnes.
Mm-hmm.
The Barnes family was the dominant ownership entity in the bank.
Do you feel at that time perhaps you said that you were a lot younger and leadership's a lot older. Do you feel like perhaps you were being groomed at that time to move up into leadership?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not saying this with any brag in mind, but I think you look around and say, how do I fit in this organization? And you can scope that out pretty fast. I think that's true in most organizations. You can figure where you stand, and you can say, I may not get this promotion, and I didn't get every one of them, and there were some that I was maybe slightly disappointed about, but they either got to promote you or bring somebody else in, because you can make those judgments. So, and I did that along the way.